You're listening to a podcast from the Abbey Theatre's Oral History Project. For more information about the archive, visit abbeytheatre.ie. The Great Hunger by Tom MacIntyre premiered on the Peacock stage at the Abbey Theatre in 1983. It marked a unique collaboration between the playwright, director Patrick Mason and actor Tom Hickey. In this podcast, we hear Tom MacIntyre, Tom Hickey, Patrick Mason and actor Bríd Neachtain talking about the process.
There was The Great Hunger, published in 1942. We're now in the 70s, right? You could hear a murmur in the air in literary circles. It's a pity someone doesn't do something with The Great Hunger. Okay, and that question was inside me also. So I'm in Boston, and there's a Pissarro exhibition in what's called the Isabella Gardner Museum, major museum in Boston. I wander in, I look up there on the wall, Pissarro, men and women in a hayfield. Joing! Something explodes. And I knew how I could shape the Great Hunger poem to a play. I should say that anytime I was next or near New York, I'd be the first to go to see the Merce Cunningham or the Pina Bausch or the Little Theatre experimental stuff. And they were a huge help, especially in the zone of movement and gesture. And the theatre of the image was big news. The theatre I was interested in, I'd call, I think The Great Hunger at its best is the theatre of the image, right? And that was my passion. The Great Hunger was where we really made it work because, well, an enormous help, the imagistic power of the poem. And this was the flowering of the theatre of the image period. And I was fascinated with the, all right, words, and I was reared on words, can create magic, but the propagators of the theatre of the image would say, and I found myself saying, the imagistic is even more powerful because there are no words to fuzz or confuse between the viewer and the image. Just if you get the image right, you're in business. Now, I would say, and maybe I shouldn't say, there were multitudes who saw The Great Hunger in the Peacock, and they won't in a long day forget Hickey upside down on that gate. Maguire sat on a wooden gate. Maguire sat on a wooden gate. Maguire sat on a wooden gate and didn't give a damn. Or switching to the mother, an icon. I was brought up on the doctrine in Ballieborough, that small town 8 or 9 miles east. The Irish mother is an icon. Let us discuss that at today's meeting. Right, I said to myself, well, if she's an icon, make her an icon. And that was a huge jump into the language of the play, right? Audiences couldn't take their eyes off the icon, right? And the priest talking to her and consoling her, right? Or Paddy Maguire talking to her. I think that's where I fell with some authenticity into the theatre of the image, which I'd been consciously and unconsciously, above all from Wuppertal, Pina Bausch territory, to London, powerfully in Manhattan, and back to Dublin, where you'd be searching hard to find it.
And the experience is just being handed a really fascinating piece of work, which you're not quite sure how on earth it does work, but there's something in it that intrigues you. With The Great Hunger, I was absolutely blown away by it. And this is the thing, you get something and it's not all there, but there's something in it where you just go, oh wow. And I remember the wow factor was the mother. Was the mother in the kitchen,
yes,
you know,
yes.
The chest of drawers, which is the mother. And I thought that was so inspired and so extraordinary. And the possibilities, the power of that. And then he had on the other side of the stage, where the church area was, he had this sort of card table where the priest did some 3-card tricks. And I said, Tom, you don't mind my saying so, but you have this unbelievable kind of iconic creature in the kitchen, and the 3-card trick, I said, there's no contest, there's no power. You've got this atomic power station in one corner of the stage, and the other stage is slick, no nonsense and all that. Oh, no, you're right. No, you're absolutely right. And the more we talked about it, and in fact, I did actually say to him, we've got to get an object that has that same presence there. And I said, what about a tabernacle? Well, you can't think more potent, and that's it. And we were off. And I tell that story really, not because it reflects well on me, but that's the process. Yes. That you're kind of constantly saying, there's enough there that it catches you. But then you say, well, why is this corner of the stage not catching me? Why does this character not work for me? Why does this scene not work for me? And you've got all this power here, why not here? And then you just start this dialogue, this constant process. And then, of course, in rehearsal, particularly with Great Hunger, there were huge sequences. I mean, he gave us this fantastic resource, this extraordinarily detailed scenario, full of images and objects and gestures, each one of which had to be animated and explored, and then rejected or, absorbed, depending on its impact. And there's so much of rehearsal with a new play which is about testing. It's testing the theory against the practice, the idea against the presence, and saying, actually, looks great on paper, but something doesn't work. Why? What is it? So there's a lot of that going on, and that was a very collaborative process.
I went up to the author I'd never met before. There's a line in The Great Hunger, Patrick Maguire went home and made cocoa. This was in the first week. I said, Mr. MacIntyre, Patrick Maguire went home and made cocoa. What do you do? What surrounds that? What do you do? There was a pause. Look, he says, pitch it somewhere between the enigmatic and the quotidian, and you won't go wrong. That was an early event. So I said, it was rather like when Patricia Ionesco went, boom, we're in business here. Yeah. So Patrick very rightly said, as far as I remember, look, we don't know where this is going to go or what we're going to do. But basically what we started off doing was improvising, which never went on in the Abbey before, in my view. Maybe it did, but not to my knowledge. Improvising, scene one, whatever it is, what's this? Improvise it. And
get some development in the middle of the improvisation. And it mightn't be as prominent as written. Things like that happened all the time with MacIntyre's work, that there would be an object, or mostly objects, who are in the original script. And when we sort of began to work on the core of the scene, they were never used, so they just walked out. But something else walked in that became very important. So it was all open, as Patrick would watch. Some of these improvisations were crazy. And there was one scene in particular in the original Great Hunger. We called it the Tangler scene. It was set on, it was surreal, but set at the fair. And the Tangler at the fair is the guy in between the farmer who's selling the animal and the buyer, that guy who comes down and buys cows for butchers and that. And the Tangler brings the spits on the two hands and they make a bargain. So we worked on a Tangler scene for at least 2 days. And I think it was a Friday morning, I remember MacIntyre coming in, he says, "Patrick, I've solved the Tangler scene." "Wonderful," says Patrick, "that's wonderful." "Yes," he says, "it's cut."
I loved working on the MacIntyre plays, the early MacIntyre plays. That was a completely different way of working. And it was a fluke that I was actually cast in the first. I wasn't cast in the first production. In the first production of The Great Hunger, when it went into rehearsals, because I was in Mary Make Believe, it was a musical on the Abbey stage, and Morny Grania was cast as Tom Hickey's sister. And Morny Grania had an accident. She fell off her bicycle, and Joe Dowling said, "You will take over from Morny Grania." And I was very fortunate, really, that somebody else had to drop out, and I was, as a member of the company. Again, you just played. You had no choice as to what you played, so you played. And it was great for me, because I was much younger. Tackling an older part and stuff, but that was something that I had seen actors do. They had started rehearsals. They had actually, I think they were 2 weeks into rehearsals. So the script will be left for you at the stage door, and so I picked up the script, and of course the script was not the usual script that you'd get. There was like Maguire or whatever moves to the gate, explore in rehearsal. Mary Ann comes in left with a bucket. Again, explore. So I went, oh my God, because we were used to a beginning, a middle, and an end in that order. Tom's work was not a beginning, a middle, and an end in that order. So Ailish McBride was the stage director, so I went in on the Monday, and Patrick was directing, Patrick Mason, and Tom MacIntyre was in the room. And at the time, and that's a wonderful thing that the Abbey that Abbey training gave you. At the time, I certainly wasn't Mary Ann's age, She was a spinster's sister to Maguire in the poem. She'd be in her 40s or late 40s or 50s. So I went, oh my God. So I went into rehearsal, and everybody was like, there were no scripts. Everybody, okay, into the middle of the floor and do something. And okay, link in. So this was how Patrick, and that was the wonderful thing about Patrick, and I felt Tom was very fortunate to have a director like Patrick, directing the beginning, the cycle, because he understood that it wasn't a normal script in the sense of a normal script, So that was very scary. That was very, very scary, because we weren't, you didn't have any formal training in movement, you didn't have anything, so you just kind of had to draw on something. But it was also very exciting.
I began to realise as time went on that for some strange reason I could empathise. I sort of knew how it worked with it. We don't know, as Patricia said, from why. It was just an accident. But I could suss. So I began to, MacIntyre would invite me up to the house in Ranelagh and we'd discuss the whole thing, etc. I began to get very close to him because I sort of had an instinct of something. It's hard to describe, an instinct. And it would cost him nothing, as I said, to look up at a scene that's been done. He said, "Who wrote this?" And he'd write something else immediately in the rehearsal room. But the interesting thing then, word began to get out in the Abbey that these lunatics were shouting and roaring and doing all sorts of strange things. And we became known as the lunatics in the basement. It was extremely demanding, physically, mentally, and every other way. And the real thing was that then, scene by scene by scene, we went through, and of course one scene, the discovery we made in that would affect another scene, and it was all going, shaping itself in a sort of a way. We did the first half. Jesus, I said to myself, it's all very well to be doing this scene by scene, but am I going to be able to do, and I haven't done the second half yet. I got an awful fright. And I remember the morning of a technical dress. It was more a dress, Saturday morning. I was so exhausted. I said, I think I'm going to die. I'd probably die on the stage this morning. I feel so bad. I feel so not ready for this. But anyway, I did it. And of course then I got used to it. But it was really tough. But clearly it was working. I have to tell you a funny story. MacIntyre and Patrick would have discussions after the previews to tell the audience, that many of the audience were very angry because they didn't understand it with their heads, instead of letting it wash over them, you know. Patrick would say, no, I didn't ask you if you understood it. I did ask you if you recognized it. That was Patrick's bottom line. An old fella stood up in the third row and he says, MacIntyre, he says, I've been watching you for ages now, he says, and you're up to your old tricks again. People got frustrated because they didn't understand it with their heads. It wasn't meant for their heads. But extraordinarily, some of the people that were giving out about it would come to me a few months later and said, I still can't forget that show. See, this was really reassuring. And that was 83. When we came back to The Great Hunger in 86, Patrick had had a rethink, Tom had had a rethink, and everybody, the script was altered in many, da 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 da. Marlene Dietrich singing that, and Maguire going up to the tabernacle. That was an innovation in the second one, as far as my memory tells me. That was one of the particular ones that was sensational, worked in my view in a sensational manner. They got rid of three fates who had candles and things in the first one. That went. Instead, rushing through the gate came 3 or 4 of them in gas masks. MacIntyre said, this is set during the war. We're not giving it enough attention. And that's where the gas masks and Lily Marlene came from. So it was, and Patrick brought in Lily Marlene, I think. The effect was Patrick, what went on a lot of the time was that poor Patrick, the rational Englishman, with 2 irrational, myself mainly and MacIntyre, on each side, was an extraordinary cocktail, you know. But he was able to shape all this lunacy. I think that maybe it had to do with where you were from. I think that the rural people hadn't as much trouble with it as the metro people. And of course, there was the Kavanagh fan club, as it were, you know. It nearly didn't get on. There was legalities passing between Ireland and America. And there was some Patrick Kavanagh fans. So enforcers thought it was sacrilegious to do it. You know, you had that sort of reaction. We even had a visit from one of the religious organizations, because there's a masturbation scene with the bellows. But then that was going to happen regularly in the forthcoming years with MacIntyre on the stage. The audience in Russia, to my view, is the same as here. I sort of twigged something. Dominic Behan wrote a play, the last line of which was, "Mother Ireland, get off me back." But then I realized when we were in Russia that Russia is known as Mother Russia as well. So it's female irrational energy that we share, I think. We're quite similar in many, many ways. So I thought they liked The Great Hunger a lot, I have to say, in Russia. Where it wasn't popular in a very decided manner was Manhattan. The Irish Americans thought it was a disgraceful reflection on lovely religious Ireland, that this was outrageous, and they left. You could hear them leaving when we were performing down near where the Twin Towers was. It was down there in a college space. But they were scandalised by it. It wasn't popular with the Irish Americans. It was in the wrong place. It should have been further uptown off Broadway or something. Just wasn't suitable. But it drove some people crazy because they weren't quite able to adjust the way you perceive it, this stuff. And then they'd recognise, as Patrick says, some of it, and then it helped them with the next bit that confounded them. So it was a battle royal. It was a battle royal, you know, but great. Great. I remember once we arrived in from rehearsing in some space near the big tree there in Dorset Street. Forgotten the name of the place. And we walked in through the front door of the Abbey and all the fire alarms went off. As if, look out, here they come.
MacIntyre remembers in rehearsal every day, every moment, as part of that collaboration. I mean, he used to exercise with us. We'd do all our warm-ups and, you know, improvise. And MacIntyre was part, as I would be. You know, there was a genuinely daily collaborative process going on.
Tom was sitting in the room all the time. Well, Tom was never one for a lot of dialogue. He did not like it, you know, he would not. You would ask, I remember asking Tom, how do I play this? You know, just to give me a sort of thing. And he said, treat it as a laundry list. This would be, you know, this would be your note. Treat it as a laundry list. Or, so it was always the movement, the gesture, you know. He was sitting in and he'd go away and write a sort of a scene around that. And you, as an actor as well, brought a lot to it. So it was that collaboration between director, writer and actor that really and in the sense of The Great Hunger, you went back to the poem, you went back to the source. I remember going back to the source a lot and looking and reading and stuff and trying to get, you know, draw from that and apply it then to your character, because at the end of the day you had to, you know. And again, that was very, very, I mean, we played the Peacock, and we could hear people leaving and people going rubbish, and we went to the Edinburgh Festival, and on our first day we just heard the seats leaving, going up, and that was very difficult. It was difficult as actors because you had to believe in what you were doing and stuff. And yet we went to Anna McCarrick, and it was a big fundraising thing, and there were 2 nights, one night as the gala fundraising, and we played it in the shed. And I remember Patrick and Tony Wakefield, because there were cows that had to be milked before we actually went in and set up. And they cleaned out the shed, we set up. There were rats everywhere, so it was fantastic, open air. And the ordinary members, if you could call it ordinary members of the pub, got every nuance in that piece, and you went, that's fantastic. It's fantastic. So kind of moments like that as an actor and as were very special, very special. And very fortunate with Tom Hickey, who was very, who responded to that in a sort of totally different, performance to anything that had been seen before. But yes, within the Abbey building itself, people were saying, what in the name of God is that? What is going on? It was a struggle. Yeah, it was. It was kind of, there was a feeling of, oh God, they're mad.
If you've been a pilgrim for 5 or 10 years, which is my position, the joy of seeing the house, of hearing the silence of the house before, let us say, Hickey hanging upside down on a gate, right? Suddenly I was into terrain where the imagistic was beginning to sing. And that's where I'd been consciously and unconsciously heading for the previous 5-10 years, I'd say, right? And the silence in the theatre at key moments, that's the silence I long to hear. They're spellbound.
Thank you for listening to this podcast from the Abbey Theatre's Oral History Project. For more information about the archive, visit abbeytheatre.ie.